The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
I promised everyone I would eliminate the BS at the beginning of the show, and so today I give you Fantasy NBA Today, a Hoop Ball presentation. Dan Besbris, Adrian Benjamin's your two hosts on Tuesday. It's Tuesday's episode. It's the second one of the week. Adrian, good morning.
Good morning, Dan.
Whatever.
How are you?
You paused because it's not actually the morning when we're recording, huh?
No, but that's okay.
Yeah.
I could picture the morning right now. It's
yeah,
all good.
The dew is just drying off the leaves outside your Huntington Beach apartment. You're probably doing okay down there, right?
It's not bad. It's not bad. I can't complain.
Yeah, I can't complain either. Hey, you know what? I lied. I do have some BS I want to talk about at the beginning of today's show. First of all, you can follow us on Twitter at Dan Besbris and at Adrian Benjamins. You can follow Hoopball by going to hoop-ball.com or at hoopballfantasy on Twitter. I read an article, and it's basketball related. This BS is basketball related. I read an article about LeBron James and his two houses in Brentwood, and it caught my attention because I technically do live in the Brentwood community. It's Los Angeles. It's a Los Angeles mailing address, but it's an area. I'm in an area that I think is known as South Brentwood, which is mostly apartment complexes. It's still nice, but it's not the Brentwood that people think about when they hear the word. LeBron is in that, and he bought a $22 million house. $22 million house, Adrian.
Wow.
What the hell? I mean, what can you even do? Okay, I love the fact that LeBron's in LA. I love the fact that I could literally push my kid in a stroller to his house, but $22 million? What can you even do with that much space?
I don't know. That's got to be some crazy house. I mean, I picture he's got to have a giant garage, right, for all the cars. He's got to have a court. Got to have the crazy pool, with the infinity.
You got to have like the driveway with the area where the valets can hang out, right? Just the valet chilling spot.
The most ultimate man cave game room movie theater. I mean,
you might have a studio. Dude might have a sound stage in his new house. It's just like it boggles my mind. It's as the crow flies, because I found it on TMZ. He's on a street called Rockingham here in Brentwood, which also, by the way, I did a little Zillow search, and there's a $40 million house for sale up there, which is just, like, that's more expensive than the baseball stadium we were trying to build in Bakersfield. This is a house for a person, not a baseball stadium. Anyway, so
is that near OJ's house?
No, but actually I'm like 4 blocks from that. I am right on it. I'm for sure that when I take my kid on stroller walks and we go to the Ralph supermarket, we go right past the Nicole Brown Simpson site. They used to have a little thing there, but I think they tore it down because, double murder. But, and here's the other weird story of our community. So the LeBron thing, I'm definitely going to push the kid in a stroller up there and see if I can catch a glimpse of LeBron James. I also saw Dodgers radio broadcaster Charlie Steiner at the supermarket, and I didn't harass him, which that's going to bother me until my dying day. Okay, that's enough BS. I promised there wasn't going to be any, and there was some anyway. Because, Adrian, you and I get to talk on a podcast once a week, so how can I can't go into a show without BSing with you a little bit. You're my guy.
Hey, man, I'm here for whatever you got. So.
That is a dangerous stone to throw. Okay, so today's episode of Fantasy NBA Today, we got a couple of things to talk about. Number one, I did send out a sort of a last-minute tweet to see if anybody had a couple of mailbag questions. We got 3 submissions. One of them is outstanding. The other 2 are pretty funny, and I'm going to do them on the show because, damn it, we need some humor in these dark days. And one of those questions I think is actually going to lead us into the bulk of today's topic, which will be draft stuff. It's going to be the first time we tease it, and obviously there's a lot of that going on. I want to actually start with that. I want to do a little bit of fantasy stuff. Don't worry, to those of you that sent in the funny mailbag questions, we will get to those. But the first mailbag question comes from Ben Lumsden, who tweeted, "Are there any fantasy NBA mock draft sites available at this point, or do we have to wait until ESPN and Yahoo start up later this summer? And my answer to this question is totally not an answer to his question, which is I actually don't do almost any mock drafts. I study the results of other people's mock drafts. And this is something that I talked about at great length on last year's pods. And Adrian, I thought this was a good topic because I knew you and I are in very different boats on this particular prep tool. I really studied in depth one very, I called it like the pros and Joes mock drafts, as many of you may recall from last year. A pro mock draft where it had pros from a bunch of different websites, a Joe's mock draft, which was basically just random humans on Yahoo, and then sort of a combination of that, where sometimes you had like a site-specific mock draft or a combo Joe's and pros. So I guess like 4 types. And by the end of looking at those 4 types of mock drafts, I could basically tell you where almost anybody was going to get taken. And so I, in terms of me, I did 2 mock drafts last year. 2. That's it for the entire offseason. And I don't know that I needed to do any of them to understand exactly where guys were going because I just studied the 4 types, in my opinion. Adrian, you come from a little bit of a different standpoint on this stuff.
Yes, Dan, I am the mock draft king. I do so many mock drafts that I was telling you before we started recording this, Yahoo gives you a coin when, like this award or whatever, when you've done 50 mock drafts. I get 3 of those during mock draft season. So
yeah,
I do over 150 mock drafts. And, Dan, what's really interesting is when I very first, when the mock drafts, when they first open, and I prefer to do Yahoo. I always wait to Yahoo. I don't even know if there's any mock drafts open because I always just wait for Yahoo to open. I print out a ranking sheet that I create, and I mock draft off my ranking sheet, meaning I actually cross guys off as they go off the board. I build a team. It gets to the point where I no longer need that sheet anymore. I can draft off the top of my head, or I set my queue up. Like before the draft even starts, I set my queue up. Oh, I'm drafting in spot number 2. I know I want these guys in second round. I know I want these guys in third round. I'll set my queue up, and then I can have like a game going on in the background, or I can have a TV show and I can just sit and watch. But Dan, I learned so much from mock drafts. You just memorize where guys are ranked, or generally where guys are valued, how they're perceived with other people. It is the ultimate tool to prepare for your real draft. And I'm telling you, Dan, it gets to the point where it just becomes automatic because I do so many. I'll wake up, I'll do 2 before I leave the house.
You're a sick individual. Okay, let me address this reply to you, but also to Ben, who sent in the mailbag question, which is, I don't believe that doing a mock draft today is helpful at all for actual fantasy drafts in late September, early October. Things are going to change so much between mid-July and early October that you might do a mock draft today where, we can come up with some hypothetical, but it doesn't really need to make any sense. Let's say if you did a mock draft today and who else is going to get signed? Like Marcus Smart, maybe he ends up somewhere that changes something for a backcourt. Here's the point I'm trying to get across. We don't need a hypothetical to make this point. A week ago, this is better. A week ago, I liked Ersan Ilyasova's prospects. If you had done a mock draft with me like a week and 2 days ago, before Brook Lopez was signed, I'd have told you to take Ersan, 120, 125, something like that. I figured he'd be able to eclipse that number in Milwaukee, and I thought you could probably get him pretty late in the draft. 2 days later, Brook Lopez gets signed by the Bucks. I wouldn't draft Ilyasova at all. And these types of things happen throughout the offseason. Guys are going to continue to get moved. We're going to hear more about playing time. Injuries are going to happen. They'll trickle in training camp is going to be something. Even though it doesn't really mean much, it's going to do something. But, and most importantly, you're going to see the hype train for different guys take off. And that's the type of thing that moves draft position over the next 6 to 8 weeks. More than that. I guess it's more like 8 to 10 weeks. So doing a mock draft now, you might be able to get a guy like Jonathan Isaac later than 100. And if you did that same mock draft in early October, I don't know what the hype train is going to be, Adrian or Ben or whoever, but he might start getting drafted. His ADP might jump from like 100 to 75. So don't prepare yourself right now by doing mock drafts. This is a time when you should actually be focused, I believe, more on just making your personal ranking list and not yet trying to get a feel for where other guys are going. Because, I mean, the B150 isn't out yet. Roto World's numbers aren't out yet. Basketball Monsters numbers aren't out yet. I think Hashtag Basketball might be the only site that put out some preliminary dynasty numbers so far. Those types of things, these big websites, they do move the needle on dudes. And if you're drafting before or after those numbers come out, it's going to drastically impact where guys are taken. So I don't think there's even really much of a point of doing a mock this early in the game. Have you, Adrian, have you ever done one this early, ever?
I've never done one now. I'm not even sure what site hosts that mock drafts right now. I always wait till Yahoo opens, and Yahoo opens pretty early. And I feel like every year it gets a little bit earlier and earlier. And the day that that Yahoo opens, I will let you know. I will shout it out on Twitter. Mock drafts are open. And so, Dan, you make a really good point. When you start doing mock drafts, the moment mock draft season starts, it's completely different come draft time. Guys off the top of my head that changed a lot. When mock drafts very first started last season, Aaron Gordon was a guy I was getting like round 8 or higher.
Great
or
point.
Lower, I
Great
should say.
point. Great point.
When it came time to draft day, like your actual draft day, which is when is that? Like early November.
Early October,
he was going like 4th round or even higher. In some of my leagues, he went in 3rd round. There was so much hype. Kyle Kuzma is a guy that was not even drafted in mock drafts at the beginning of mock draft season. He had a stellar summer league. He went off in summer league, Dan. And then, I mean, summer league, he went off. But then in preseason, he went off again. And all of a sudden, when it came time to draft time, he was getting drafted in like the 7th round, where this was the guy you could just, at the very beginning of draft season, you could get as like your last pick flyer. So you're absolutely right, Dan. This early, it's going to be so different when you get closer to your real draft.
You end up sort of fooling yourself into thinking. Aaron Gordon was a fantastic example, by the way, Adrian. That was a good one because his number moved so far. You very rarely see a guy go from an ADP of like 85 to 100 down to like 40. That's a huge, huge jump. Guys jumping from like 120 to 90, that happens all the time because, as we've said many times on the podcast, those guys are all ranked really close together, so it just comes down to who has a little bit of a hot check mark next to their name. But to jump into that ultra early neighborhood, that meant that a lot of things were pointing in the right direction for a dude. And so, and this isn't to say, you can do a mock draft if you can find one right now, but it's basically useless. You end up deluding yourself into thinking that you can wait on a guy like Aaron Gordon, and then when actual draft time comes around, you're never going to get him, and you're going to end up scrambling if you do mock drafts at that point, saying, oh my God, this dude's going 40 slots earlier than I expected. I got to adjust everything I was planning on. So it ends up becoming sort of a difficult standpoint. I want to spend some more time on today's podcast talking about mock draft strategy. But before we do that, I do want to take a brief foray into the weird mailbag questions we got. One of them, of course, this is just poking fun at me. He says, Dan, why didn't you decide to go to medical school? Hardy har har. Well, you only need one in a family, and Dr. Bespers is my wife. The other one, and this is the one, thank you, by the way, Alex for that one. That was goofball one. This is the one that I thought was really funny. And I don't have to use the censor button very often on this podcast, but I'm going to do it for this. And many of you have, as a younger people, played the game with friends, Marry, Kill, and we're going to do it on today's podcast with three of the biggest blowhards in sports broadcasting, Stephen A. Smith, Skip Bayless, and Colin Cowherd. Oh. Adrian, do you want to go first, or do I have to take the honors on this one?
Oh my gosh, you got to go first because I can't stand those guys. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I think it's gonna have to be. Boy, I think you have to marry Colin Cowherd, right? Because he's the most level-headed of the three.
Oh, geez, I guess out of those three, yes. But calling him level-headed, wow. But I guess you're right.
I think I got to kill Skip Bayless, and I think Stephen A. Smith gets the sexual encounter. That's the way it's going to have to go. We've hit a new low for fantasy NBA today.
I think I would kill Stephen A. Smith. Dan, I don't know if you remember when Porzingis got drafted, and Stephen A. Smith went on an epic rant about how awful that draft pick was when the New York Knicks selected Porzingis, who, if you look back at that draft now, maybe the best player in that draft. So after that rant,
he lost you, huh? So you're banging Skip Bayless. Congratulations. This is quite a day for you. All right, guys. I thought we'd have just a brief moment of fun. I got to write down a note to myself that I got to go back and throw a censor in around the 17-minute mark of this podcast. Okay, so a little bit more on mock draft stuff. I wanted to throw that into the middle of the show because it felt kind of wrong to open with that, and it also felt very wrong to close with it. But okay, mock draft stuff. Adrian, do you tailor yourself in the mock drafts to anything in particular, or are they all Yahoo random? You just insert yourself into whatever the next mock draft is occurring on one of these big websites?
Yeah, and that's probably not a good thing. I don't really pay attention to what the categories are or whatnot. The only thing that I'm really paying attention to is most of my leagues are 10 or 12 teams. In fact, my home league that I really prepare for is a 12 team, although we may make it a 14 team this league. So I'll practice doing 12 or 14 because I really want to know, where guys are going to be available in that type of league. But as far as the categories, I don't really pay attention too much to that. And I should probably, because there are other guys in there that are maybe drafting according to the setup of what the mock draft rules are. So, yeah.
You know why I like the different cross-section mock drafts is because you can really figure out who's moving the needle and why. So last year, I was very fortunate to sort of be connected in this industry with guys like Brewski and with some of the dudes over at different websites and my pal David Kleiss, who's been on this podcast a couple of times. And so I was able to get access to the results of what was basically a hoop ball mock draft, which I think I might have been in that one, but I'm not sure that I was actually paying attention to it. Sorry, guys. What was effectively a Roto-World mock draft, an across the industry mock draft. That one was run by Chris Towers over at CBS Sports. I also was able to see sort of a general mock draft, and I just sort of took results from that one. I was able to get a mock draft from our buddies over at In This League. I love those guys, by the way. Shout out to
those guys are the best.
They're hilarious.
They're so funny,
and they are year round, man. They're doing they're cranking out their baseball things. I know they spend a lot of time at spring training, going through all the minor leaguers. That is an unbelievable undertaking. Well, don't worry, we'll get them back on this podcast as the NBA season approaches as well. Scott and Chris, the lords of In This League. So by the time I was able to go through all of those industry mock drafts, I was able to see, okay, here are the guys that the Roto-World dudes favor in a big way. And here are the guys that the hoopball people favor in a big way. And that's a pretty easy one. I mean, I talk to Brewski 7 times a week. So I know what the B150 is going to look like before it comes out, and so I have a pretty good idea of that side. You can get an idea of what the basketball monster guys are going to do. Once you know that, and once you know if their numbers are public, like, for instance, Ryan Naus over at RotoWorld, when his numbers come out, the ADP on guys changes, much the way it does when the B150 comes out. So if you tailor yourself, if you know if your legitimate draft is coming before or after the public release of certain numbers, you can have a pretty good idea of where a guy might get drafted. Does that make sense? That was kind of circuitous logic.
Yes, and one of the really interesting things, Dan, is the mock drafts are skewed quite a bit by the ranking order in the available window pool. So Yahoo, they do their ranking, and in the very beginning of mock draft season, this ranking is a mess. They have guys ranked nowhere near where they should be, but as mock draft season goes on, they tweak these rankings slowly, and you see guys start to creep where they really should be, so that when it's actually closer to actual draft season, it actually gets pretty accurate. But that's another reason, as you mentioned, you got to take doing mock drafts early with a grain of salt, because, people who are drafting, they're looking out of that available window pool. And sometimes a guy who you might have ranked really high for whatever reason is down in the hundreds, which is crazy, right? Like, you might have this guy in your 50 range. And for whatever reason, the early Yahoo rankings have him at 100. But that's a really interesting point that you make. And the rankings definitely skew the how the mock drafts end up.
You know what actually would be fun is getting into an actual draft super early, because then you could totally take advantage of those ridiculous numbers you were talking about. But nobody has leagues like that. And plus, guys get hurt, and you end up... it's best to have a draft really close to the start of the NBA season, but man, you could really exploit the numbers if you got into a league that drafted at like the beginning of August. Think about how bad some of the numbers are right now. Yeah,
so Yahoo... Dan, have you heard of the Yahoo Pro Leagues?
That's actually... No. What the heck is...
So Yahoo does something, they're called Yahoo Pro Leagues. Yahoo runs these leagues completely random. So you choose the league you want. You want head-to-head. You want roto. You choose the size you want, 10 teams, 12 teams. Then you choose a cash point. So there's $25 leagues, $50 leagues, $100 leagues. Then you pick your draft day. It gives you a calendar. You pick your draft day. You're randomly put in these leagues with random people, but these are real leagues run by Yahoo, and they open pretty early. So you can jump into these leagues. I don't know how many people, like how many leagues they actually fill in that early, because there's probably not a high demand. But as you mentioned, you could really take advantage of how wrong the rankings are, and you could really sweep up and draft an amazing team. And these are real leagues for money, run by Yahoo.
That's crazy.
That's interesting.
Oh man, I might have to throw my hat into the ring on some of those. I'm always looking to add one league here and there and just see how it goes. The other thing, by the way, and I can't believe I forgot to mention it, is our good buddy here at Hoopball, the Panda, they call him, Mike Passador, who is he's the editor over basically on everything over on the writing side of Hoopball. He puts out an ADP tracker as part of the Hoopball draft guide. So you do have to be a premium subscriber to it, or, Adrian, you could be, Hoopball staff like us. But you get access to a weekly track on whether guys' ADP is moving up or down. And it's imperfect because it doesn't tell you all of what's happening. So, like, for example, late in draft season last year, Aaron Gordon, we'll just stick with the same name, his ADP was moving, and every week you could see it move 2 to 3 slots, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when you consider the fact that Yahoo doesn't reset their ADP late in the fantasy season, it just keeps adding on, and much like at the end of an NBA season or at the end of a baseball season, every shot or every at-bat has a much smaller impact on your overall percentages than your first at-bat of the year, right? Like if you get a hit in baseball, you're hitting 1,000 after one day. But if you're batting 281 on the last day of the year and you get a hit, you might get to 282. That's what I'm talking about here. So if there's a week where Aaron Gordon gets drafted in the 40s after getting drafted in the 90s for 3 months, his ADP is only going to move from 90 to 87, but it tells you this guy's getting drafted way earlier than his pre-ranking on Yahoo, and you can adjust your numbers accordingly. You can also do it, as Adrian does it, by doing 50 mock drafts on the last couple days of the offseason. So there's a couple different ways, and truthfully here, I mock you a little bit with that statement, Adrian, but your way does tell a better story because a mock draft up on that very last moment gives you basically what's the equivalent of the first day of the baseball season or the basketball season, where you get to see. If you did 5 mock drafts on the last day, Adrian, I bet you saw Aaron Gordon going in the 40s and 50s in all of them, even though his pre-ranking still said 90 and his ADP still said 87. So you really did have the best data there.
We're coming up on a lull. The NBA lull is coming up.
Yeah, it's super whack.
I think this next month coming up is like the only month where there's nothing going on really. Free agency's over, summer league's over. So, we're going to have this little period. This is where I'm going to focus on my rankings, Dan. I'm going to build my rankings, get them, hopefully there's not a lot of movement because free agency's done. And, so we kind of know what we're looking at as far as depth chart rotations. So anyways, the reason why I love doing mock drafts the moment they open is just pretty much out of boredom, Dan. I'm done with my rankings. I need something to do. And it's like, and you know what, too? Even though you got to take it with a grain of salt, it's fun to have this team of you get 10 guys that are in your top 50, maybe all on the same team. And it's fun to look at it. Yeah, you do know that, okay, I'm not actually going to get this team, come actual fantasy season, but it's just fun to look at this monster team that you put together.
Do you, Adrian, do you ever do a mock draft where you target guys that you just like having, or are they all super serious for you?
No, mostly serious, but yeah, there are times where in certain rounds where I'll just be like, I got this position locked up. I really want this guy. Yeah, maybe I'm taking him 2 rounds ahead of where he should go, but I just really want this guy. The other thing too, I find is, when you're drafting on the end, so you've got to wait for your pick to, it goes all the way to the other end and it comes all the way back. Sometimes I'll just grab the guy I want because I know even though I'm taking him maybe 15 spots early or even earlier than that, I know he's not going to be there on the way back. And it's funny because, you could chat with people and sometimes people will be like, oh, why'd you just take that guy right there? And I'm like, I really want this guy. And likely he's going to be gone in the next 20 picks, before this thing gets back to me. So, yeah, I don't know. I do a little bit of both, I'd say.
All right, let me see if I can blow your mind here before we wrap up the podcast. I actually believe, and this is the Dan Besbris cold take of the day. I actually believe that avoiding your target guys in a mock draft gives more information than taking your target guys in a mock draft. Because if you avoid them, you'll know when they get taken by other people. And then you'll know when you would need to take them otherwise. Does that make sense?
Yes. And you do usually learn that already because you'll target a guy and let's say you get him in this first mock draft. So now you say okay, I really like how that mock draft ended up. Let me see, can I get this other guy that's ranked ahead of him? Will he still be there? Then he's not. Somebody else takes him. And then okay, I got to get him in that round. If I don't, he's likely going to be gone. So you do kind of learn that already. by taking the guy, and then also too by experimenting and not taking the guy. One of the things I love doing, because I do so many mock drafts, I experiment like, hey, what happens if I go big, heavy to start? And then, oh, okay, I didn't really like the way that turned out. And there's some bigs that I liked in round 4. So you learn like, okay, let me get my guards right here. And I know that, I can get my bigs later. Dan, you just learn so much from doing mock drafts.
He is the mock draft king. He is Adrian Benjamins. If you have mock draft questions, I think we know where you should be taking them. And that man is you. I am going to, by the way, Adrian, as this summer continues, I'm going to be playing devil's advocate with you quite often on this particular topic, because I think both of our ways of getting there are really good. As I said, your way gives you this up-to-the-minute key information. You get the actual ADP. I feel like that's that's redundant, but you get the ADP where the A stands for the word actual, and I get the ADP where the A stands for average. Average draft position is not helpful at the end of draft season because, like I said before, there's like a month at the beginning when mock drafts open up when these numbers are garbage. They're flaming trash. And then, as with the Aaron Gordon example, if a guy's getting drafted 40 rounds earlier for a week, it only moves their ADP by 2 or 3 slots. Whereas with you, the actual draft position, which you can only get by watching a crap ton of mock drafts at the last minute, you saw firsthand that Aaron Gordon was going at 45, like basically in all of your drafts right before your real one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And, it really makes you change your plan. Like Aaron Gordon, the guy I know I was getting. Okay, what's really interesting, I knew I can get him in, like, let's say round 7. Now all of a sudden in round 6, he's gone. So I was like, shoot. So now I got to get him in round 5. Wait, now round 5, he's gone. So, and then it gets to the point where you're like, okay, Dan, in my real draft, I can't take him in round 4. It's just too early.
Yeah.
So now you have now you need another plan. Okay, Aaron Gordon's off my board now. And so that's why doing these mock drafts are so beautiful. Dan, one other thing I'd like to touch on. I'm going to get really heavy into rankings coming up with the end of summer league, and it's really fun when I'm building my rankings. I come up with these comparisons where I'll get stuck trying to rank 2 or 3 guys, and I'm gonna jot these guys, or these, like, anytime I run in these like conundrums, I'm gonna jot them down. I think it'd be really fun to run these by you to see how you would go. Like, I'll be working on my small forward rankings, and there'll be 3 guys where I have them like dead even. And so whenever I run into those, I always like to jot them down, and I'm going to run those by you. I think it'd be a fun show.
Yeah, I'm going to pick the ones that have best percentages and best defensive stats. The Bespris bunch. That's the Bespris cash counters. That's my new age crap. Okay, well, we got a lot to cover over the rest of the offseason. Adrian, we can save some of it for the next pod. That was fun. I know it's July 17th, but it's never too early to start talking about the foundational stuff. And I mentioned this on yesterday's podcast. We're going to get into the foundational stuff. Draft prep, draft strategy, mock drafts, drafting by position, drafting by statistical category. And then we're going to talk about the teams now that we're through free agency. We got a lot left to cover before we actually get into mock draft time. Adrian, my man, it's a pleasure as always. Have fun with Colin Cowherd? No, have fun with Skip Bayless. I screwed it up. I forgot who your choice was. Have a good night with Skip. Tell him to buy you something nice.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm going to see if Stephen A. will take me out to get some wine. This was Fantasy NBA Today. He's Adrian Benjamins. I am Dan Bespris. Have a wonderful Tuesday. Back tomorrow solo. That's going to be boring. I'll miss you, buddy. Thursday, I'll have Neil Rochlani on the podcast. And then Friday, Adrian and Neil will take us through to the weekend. That's what's coming up the rest of the week on Fantasy NBA Today. For Adrian, I'm Dan. We'll talk to you soon.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.